My name is Tom Lupton, and along with my supervisor, Dr. Angela Short, I carried out this study looking at the integration of ChatGPT into higher education to promote critical thinking among the students. So I'll just give you a bit of background first. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Electrical and Mechanical Engineering at DKIT, and in 2022 I started the MALT course. So it's a Master's in Learning and Teaching. Also in that year, ChatGPT came out. So as part of my research project for the MALT, I decided I wanted to do something in this area. There was a lot of hype at that time about artificial intelligence. We're all going to lose our jobs. So it was very important that we start educating our students in the area of AI, give them some exposure to it. There was a survey carried out in DKIT about staff training needs, and the main thing to come out of that was academic integrity and artificial intelligence. So a lot of the CAs maybe we traditionally had before AI might be vulnerable to AI, so they perhaps need to be reassessed. So I decided I was going to do a research project in this area of AI in education, focusing on ChatGPT. So I started my literature review of the potential uses of AI in education, and there's much promises. Personally, I think long-term personal tutors is one of the best potential uses of AI in education. The idea that an individual student can have a tutor 24/7 whenever they want it. The tutor can give them individual feedback, pace them through the content at their own pace, do out specific learning plans based on where they're weak or strong. So I really like this idea, and I know the Khan Academy have developed an app called Khan Amigo, or a little chatbot that can tailor learning experience for individuals. So long term, I think this is a really promising area. But short term, I didn't go into this as my project. Here's an image of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and when they started building this early on, they could see that the foundation wasn't right. You can build a magnificent building on top of it, but if your foundation isn't right at the start, it is problematic. And with large-scale language models, which ChatGPT is, there's some fundamental issues there. So as part of my literature review, I came across a couple of different words to help describe some of the issues with large-scale language models. It's referred to as a stochastic parrot. Like a parrot, it can repeat words, and it doesn't understand the real meaning of the words. It's just using lots and lots of training data to come up with responses to prompts. It's referred to as prone to hallucinations. A lot of the stuff we get from say the likes of ChatGPT is quite good, quite accurate information, but every now and again it can throw in something that's totally BS, and this can be quite dangerous because it can look maybe at first plausible, the information, but it can be very dangerous to have this in your content. So with regard to using ChatGPT in education, UNESCO have developed a guideline, and you should ask yourself, does it matter if the output is true? And if the answer is no, it's safe to use ChatGPT. And if the answer is yes, well, it's a bit of a grey area whether you can use it or not. So I decided for my project, I'm going to restrict it to these cases where the output doesn't matter. So keeping this restriction in mind, I decided to look at using ChatGPT 3.5 to promote critical thinking. And my participants were second year undergraduate mechanical engineering students based at DKIT, where I teach. I developed a control group from students who had previously done an assignment back in 2022, and I performed a bit of an intervention and got some students to redo a similar assignment in 2023, and they made up my experimental group. With a good uptake in participants, 16 out of 25 possible students made up the control group, and 19 out of 27 made up the experimental group. My intervention consisted of two things. First of all, the experimental group were asked to take the question that the control group answered and get ChatGPT to answer it instead. Then from that reply given by ChatGPT, the experimental group were asked to critically analyse it. Now, they were given a few guidance prompts on what they should be doing as part of this critical analysis exercise. I performed a quantitative analysis using a critical thinking rubric, which allowed me to score each assessment from 1 low to 4 high. I had 16 control group assessments, 19 experimental group analysis, and I had 19 responses from ChatGPT. And I scored all of these 1 to 4 and presented them in the following graph. So if we look here, we can see the green corresponds to the experimental group, and a score of 1 was ascertained by about 16% of my experimental group. So taking all this data then, I used it to work out the mean and standard deviation of the control and experimental group. And you can see here that they're pretty much the same, the mean, with a slight increase in the standard deviation of the experimental group. The data itself wasn't normally distributed, so I had to perform a Mann-Whitney U-test or a Wilson-Coxon-Ransom test that illustrated that there was no statistical difference between the control group findings and experimental group findings. So my intervention didn't have any significant difference overall. But there was some notable interesting developments. You can see here my control group initially half the students got a score of 2, whereas my experimental group that was down near 20%. So this extra 30%, some of them went higher, and we had actually an increase in number of students scoring above the mean score for the experimental group, and unfortunately some of the students scored lower. So we had 16% here of the students from the experimental group got a score of 1, whereas previously we had no control group students getting a score of 1. Having the numerical data on the previous slide was very beneficial, but to further understand it, I performed a thematic analysis. So when I was scoring each of these assessments for critical thinking scores, I also at the same time generated codes, and these codes were based on critical thinking performance. So I had lots of codes for the experimental group, the control group, and also ChatGPT's responses. And then I went to analyze these codes in subsets. So you see the problem I had with that 16% of students in the experimental group who got a CT score of 1. To understand why they got that score, I just looked at the codes, the thematic analysis codes for the 16 students, and the theme that came out of that was lack of engagement. I'm not 100% sure why there was a lack of engagement. Was it time constraints for the students? Maybe the assessment was a little unclear. So I would look at the literature. Probably the best way to overcome this is to get the students to do a draft of the problem, the lecturer to revise the draft, give them some feedback before they proceed. When analysing this data, I was concerned if the quality of ChatGPT's response would influence the students' performance. So let's say ChatGPT did an excellent response with a critical thinking score of 4. Well, it might be harder for that student to critically analyse it because it's quite a good response. If ChatGPT did a poor response, a critical thinking score of 1, one might think that would be easier for the student to spot mistakes and maybe discuss shortcomings of ChatGPT. So I investigated to see if there was a relationship between ChatGPT's critical thinking score and students' critical thinking score. So first of all, looking at ChatGPT, there is a variation from its responses we've seen that most of its scores were at 2, but there was some scores of higher and lower. So to analyse the data, I did out a plot with ChatGPT's critical thinking score as the independent variable and the student's critical thinking score as the dependent variable. And if we just look at one of the points here, say this point here, we can see it's blue, so it represents one data point. For this case, ChatGPT gave a response with a CT score of 1, and then a student had to go off and analyse that response, and that student got a CT score of 4. So I did out these for all the data, and then I fitted a line to it to see if there was a clear relationship between these two, if ChatGPT's CT score was actually influencing the student score, and it was a very poor fit, which indicates to me that there is not a clear linkage between the two of these variables. So looking exclusively at the codes from the ChatGPT responses, I came up with 3 themes. And the first is inconsistencies. You can see even with the CT scores there, the quality of the response from ChatGPT was quite varied. The second theme is the quality of information. Sometimes it got very, very accurate, but every now and again it would throw in something, one of its hallucinations. Now this can be beneficial from the actual exercise I'm doing, because it can challenge the students and offers a good learning opportunity. The third theme I came out with is the depth of knowledge. Oftentimes the reply by ChatGPT can be quite superficial. It maybe doesn't expand, or it might link different thoughts within the one question together. So this is something that you need to be conscious of if you're implementing it. I looked at comparing the codes from the experimental group to the control group, and I could see there still exists a lack of depth of discussion in certain students. There was a noted increase in the explanation of information. The codes from the control group focus very much on stating good information, whereas the codes from the experimental group, you could see that there was more reflection, and I guess that was informed by the knowledge that ChatGPT had this ability to hallucinate. So here's my references. I thank you very much for your time, and I welcome any discussion.